Recording started, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The time is 5:03 on February 8th, and I would like to call this meeting of the Sustainability Commission to order. In the interest of the public health and safety and pursuant of the Governor's Executive Order N2920, members of the Sustainability Commission and staff are participating in this meeting by teleconference. In accordance with the Executive Order, the public may view this meeting online, but not in conference room C101 in room A at, or in Building A at City Hall, Chula Vista, California. The city launched a virtual commenting portal, e-comment, that allows residents to comment and participate in the meeting from their own homes. You can find the link at e-comment at www.chulavistacalifornia.ca.gov/virtual meetings. Your comments must be received before I call for the close of the commenting period in order to be considered. After the commenting period is closed, I will announce a brief pause to allow the commissioners time to read the comments that have been received. If you have difficulty or need assistance in e-comment during the meeting, please email Manuel Medrano at chulavistaca.gov, and Economic Development staff will assist you. Would the Secretary, Yasmin, would you please call the roll?
I'll go ahead and do the roll.
Okay.
Commissioner Baugh.
Present.
Commissioner Guevara Gluyas. Commissioner Corrigan. Commissioner Richardson.
Present.
Co-Chair Legaspi.
Present.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Present.
And Chair Mathias.
Present. Thank you. The first call of business is a consent calendar. I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final comments on items in the consent calendar. Commissioners, as a reminder, please refresh your view on your screen to ensure your new comments appear.
Yasmin, can you put the slide with the timer, please?
I am. Give me a second, please.
Okay, the commenting time for this period is now closed. Have the commissioners had enough time to read the submitted comments? I don't believe there were any. Yasmin?
There was one comment encouraging commissioners to go to the San Diego Community Power website and with some updates as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. So would you please announce for the record the numbers of, okay, we already did that. Does the commissioner wish to pull the item for any item for discussion or questions? Anyone? Okay, so I do. It's item 2 on the minutes, and it's the potential action. I would like to create potential action for this city to work with South Bay or San Diego Building Electrical Coalition on new homes in Chula Vista, electrification on new homes in Chula Vista. So I would like to get that as an action item. Do we need to present that for next time, Manuel? How does this work?
Yes, I believe that was the request, if not already, but we're going to come back with additional information. So as far as how the work as an action, we come back to the commission as well.
Okay, so would that be for next month?
If you want us to come back as an action for next month, we have to discuss with staff. I believe the request was to provide additional information on this, and then perhaps at a later meeting, take action on it.
Okay, so at this point in time, you're not going to be taking action for next month. You're going to report back to us first, and then we decide whether we want to take action the following month?
That's correct.
That seems like a long time away. So how else can we work it to you guys could report and then we could take action at the same time?
Dennis, are you on?
Yeah, I had a question. I believe under the rules, we basically could request this meeting to have an item on the next meeting. We don't have to wait till next meeting to put a meeting agenda on the following meeting. We can request it to go on the meeting at this one. We can say put it on the next meeting.
Yeah, no, we're aware of that. We just wanted to make sure that we first provide some information, and then if you wanted to make it an action item, Dennis, I wanted to ask Dennis if you could fill in.
Yes, so, could Chair Mathias, could you please repeat the question?
So the question is on the minutes. Let me pull those up real fast. Just before the third, number 3, we talk about how the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition on new homes in Chula Vista, and we would like the city to begin working with San Diego Building Electric Coalition. And that being said, we don't know how to make it a potential action item.
So, and thank you for that, and good evening, commissioners. So for that, the action would be to ask staff to look at that request and then come back with our recommendations or provide some feedback. So the action would be direct staff to take a look at that and then bring back recommendations to the commission for your consideration.
Okay, so do we need to vote on that?
Well, can I get clarification? Are you suggesting that that's something we should do at the next meeting, or we do that right now?
If it's not on the agenda today, my understanding it would have to be an agenda item before you could take action on it.
Well, I think the chair is saying that we put that in last meeting, that we wanted this to be an action item. On the next meeting, we're at the next meeting. Therefore, it doesn't seem like we need to wait another meeting for another staff review. We ought to say, we want an action item on the next agenda, and you ought to say, good, we'll put that on for you.
I have a comment.
Yes, Commissioner
We're
Lukeski.
going to be going through these recommendations later today, and we will be able to take some action. I mean, that's the objective of our meeting today as we go through the 7 recommendations. So we can discuss that.
At that point?
I believe we can.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everybody?
I'm fine with that as long as we're going to be discussing it and being able to bring them into working with the city. I do see that it is on the climate action, plan that you guys were talking about. Yes. So I'm fine. Are we okay to move on?
But we would have to take a vote. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll move adoption of the minutes with the caveat that Chair Matthias indicated, and also compliment Robert on the extensive detail of these minutes. That's much more
Yes.
detail than we normally see. So I appreciate that. So I move adoption.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Yes. Okay. So I have motion by Richardson, Chair Richardson, and second by Legaspi, Vice Chair Legaspi. And can you call roll, Secretary?
Commissioner Ball,
Yes.
Commissioner Guevara Gluyas, still absent. Commissioner Corrigan, not on yet. The co-chair Legaspi,
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson,
Aye.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Aye.
and Chair Matthias.
Aye. Okay.
So motion passes 2 absent.
Thank you. The consent calendar passes unanimously. Okay. So next, chair comments is a section on the agenda for members of the public to address the board on items that are not listed on the agenda. I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final public comments. Commissioners, as a reminder, please refresh the view on your screen and ensure new comments appear. Okay, time's up. The commenting period for this public comments is now closed, and I'm not seeing any comments, correct?
Correct. There are no comments for under this
Okay.
item.
Okay, so next, action items. The next item on the agenda is item number 2 under action items. Review climate change working group recommendations and recommend city council approval. Staff recommendation approve and recommend to city approves and recommends to city council. Does the staff have a presentation?
We do. It should be up momentarily.
Hello, this is Corey Downs. I'll be giving the staff presentation today. Thank you all very much for your time today, as well as participation earlier in this item. I did want to call or mention the support we received from Climate Change Working Group Chair Legaspi and ask and see if he wanted to say a few words before the presentation.
Sure, Corey. I wanted to take a minute or two to just kind of go over the climate change working group. We had our first meeting in November of 2018 at police headquarters. This was in the community room. It was a rather large meeting. Unlike our sustainability meetings, there was probably about 5 times more people at this meeting and at some of the meetings that we had. The climate change working group is a pretty diverse group composed of individuals from different sectors: business, real estate, education, transportation, nonprofits, utility, business, community, and residential leaders. There was a lot of public comments at that first meeting, and we had comments from the audience, people from all walks of life. It was kind of a dark time, I gotta say. This was November of 2018. You could see at the meeting, or I could see and sense at that meeting, that people were very passionate. It was a dark time for us as climate change leaders. We were seeing at that time the government was heading in the wrong direction on climate change, and that was really impacting us all. Like I said, it was a little gloomy. Our past administration was scrubbing phrases like climate change, greenhouse gases, clean energy from appearing on government websites and publications. EPA was setting back standards in almost every industry. The climate change group is composed of 9 members, and there are alternates, and a quorum is needed to hold a meeting. We gave a lot of feedback to city staff on issues relating from public transportation to protected bike lanes to community choice energy, just to name a few. We met at anywhere there was room for us within the city. That was at Norman Park Center, basement of Building C, the police department, the Chula Vista Recreation Center. In fact, that meeting, we didn't have a quorum. We did get creative at some of our other meetings, and we did have alternates. So there was another meeting that we almost didn't have a quorum, but we had an alternate, so that worked out. We had great people. I was always impressed by the people in the climate change working group. Staff played a major role in putting together our meetings and helping us with the CAP updates and information reports. We provided presentations. They actually even helped us just in million things in this. So, and helped to actually edit the recommendations we also had. We tried to meet quarterly, but that was a challenge. We had 6 meetings in all, not including 2 public forums. Public forums is where we kind of took the climate action plan on the road. We had a meeting at the Civic Center Library and at the Otay Library as well. We had presenters. Poster boards were set up, which illustrated the sustainability goals, and Post-it notes were there for the attendees and the residents to add comments, especially those areas that concern them the most. The working group was pretty busy. We raised a lot of questions. We provided feedback and guidance and ideas. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about the 7 recommendations. Our role today is to look at these recommendations in a few minutes and analyze these actions, amend them, add any if necessary. One of the recommendations that I saw on the comments was on the permitting of solar panels, and that was an area that was brought up. We need to streamline that. It's as you can see, it was disturbing for one of the climate change working group members because we talk about clean energy, but at the same time, we contradict ourselves when we have rules that are just so rigid. So we really need to work on that, especially when you take into consideration that the climate change that the San Diego Community Power has just adopted net metering and the feed-in tariff that we saw also in the comment. So there's going to be a big wave of people that want clean energy, and we need to be set up. The city and the planning department need to be set up for those those people so that they could take advantage of these opportunities. The cap update, like I said, took a lot of work and effort from a lot of folks. Most of the heavy lifting was performed by city staff, Carolyn, Manuel, and Corey, and many others. And I want to thank the climate change working members. Hopefully they are on the other portal watching today. I know they were invited to our meeting, and we're going to actually hear from one later as well. The good news for climate change is that we're in a much brighter place now. Who would have known back in 2018 that it would take a pandemic to disrupt business as usual? The fossil fuel industry is jumping on board. I don't hear that many climate deniers that much anymore. Science is now leading the efforts again. The pandemic provided us with enough data to support and convince even the skeptics. And they're calling for action now. We saw last year the price of barrel dropped to minus $37.63 a barrel on April 20th of 2020. Fossil fuel industries once fighting climate policies are now uncertain about this. They're seeing their assets substantially devalued. Exxon lost $22.4 billion last year. That's a lot of money. They hadn't had a loss for over 20 years. That wasn't since they had their merger from Exxon Mobil. Shareholders are pushing Exxon to go green. Similar fossil fuel companies are looking for fuel cells and batteries as ways to survive. We're going to see rapid changes in climate action initiatives. They're going to be coming from the public and the private sector. The city of Chula Vista will need to gear up for these new changes. We just mentioned, mentioned the comment there from San Diego Community Power. So we need to be prepared for all this. And the actions that we make here today and in the future are going to determine how successful we are in further reducing our city's climate footprint. Thank you. You can take it from here, Corey.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Like I said, it was great to have Chair Legaspi leading the climate change working group process, providing a lot of great inspiration and ideas. Really quickly, before I get into my presentation, I also wanted to see if our Chief Sustainability Officer, Dennis Kikunga, wanted to say a few words.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Vice Chair Legaspi. Again, good evening, commissioners. So I really just wanted to spend just a couple of minutes just to first and foremost echo what Vice Chair Legaspi mentioned in terms of thanking the climate change working group members as well as the input from this commission. But in addition to that, one of the things that we really wanted to highlight as Corey gets ready to go over these recommendations in detail with you is that this is an opportunity, as we've mentioned in the past, to have the commission really be in the driver's seat in terms of some of the things that we will be working on as a city with regards to our climate action planning implementation efforts. So we're very excited and encouraged that this is one vehicle that we can essentially be able to accomplish having this commission provide input and play a key role in some of the priorities that we'll be working on going forward. Thank you, Corey.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Next slide. So I'll start the presentation, which is a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. I always like to start with a little bit of background for new members or new community members that might not have been as involved with this process. Look a little bit at the working group members and how these recommendations came to you today. Talk about the recommendations, hear from a climate change working group member, and then I think the bulk of our time will be on feedback on draft actions. This is an opportunity. The draft actions are actions that staff would like to take to achieve the recommendations. They have been shared with the climate change working group members at the same time that you received them last week, but they haven't been shared publicly outside of that. So it's kind of getting in on the ground floor. And so, comments like your desire to have something about working with the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. I've already made some notes, and those are exactly the type of ideas that we want to kind of channel through some of these draft actions. So I'll come back to that, but if there's any of those other ideas that you would like to see kind of put in place or put into action, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the draft actions, and I'm hopeful that you'll see a lot of the actions already recommended or are part of some of those actions. Next slide. Oh, and finally, I'll be ending with some just next steps of where we'll be going from here. This is not the end of the process. It is one step in the process. Next slide. Perfect. So, I always want to just kind of provide a little bit of background on the city's climate action planning history. We did adopt one of the first climate action plans in the San Diego County region, at that time called a CO2 reduction plan. Since then, and if you can click to the next slide, I'll get some animation. Since then, we've adopted 3 climate action plans, and the most recent 3 were all led by the Climate Change Working Group, which was chaired by a Sustainability Commission member and then brought to the full Sustainability Commission. So I think you can kind of see the progress of our plans, where we, every few years we work to incorporate the best new science, technology, resources from our community members. This one is a little bit quicker, shorter in time duration than some of the other ones. But that being said, there's still a lot of really great ideas that Climate Change Working Group members have. And I think it will be an important addition to our climate action planning process. And again, this is where there's opportunity to kind of, as we're creating this new climate action plan update, again, those actions are where there's lots of opportunity to bring in new ideas or kind of allow some ideas to start. Next slide. I also wanted to just provide a little bit of context, and I know you've seen this presentation at the last meeting, but for anyone who was not at the last meeting, I also just wanted to provide context around our greenhouse gas emissions. We've seen we've seen steady decreases in the last 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which is really important and great to see, because in the first few years there was increases in emissions. And a lot of that comes from the increase of population. Since 2005, our population has increased 23%. And so it just goes to show that even though we are a growing community, we can still see overall emission reductions. But you will notice that the last emission inventory, 2018, had the smallest reduction of the 3 last inventories. And so it does show that it's getting harder to see harder to generate some of the greenhouse gas emission reductions, and provides benefit for the ambitious early actions that will help us reach our more long-term 2030 and 2050 goal, which or state's goal, which we can talk about. And there was a related recommendation about today. If you do factor in the population growth, we did see our per capita emissions saw a 29% reduction since 2005. So that's almost, we've added 23% of population, and per capita our emissions are down by 29%. So that is showing that it's not, just a growth that brings down our per capita emissions. There is some solid emission reductions that we're instituting as we grow our community. I think that's a really important point to raise. With California's housing crisis, it's always important to try to allow opportunities for as many residents to live here as sustainably as possible. Next slide. Also, just wanted to provide kind of a little quick update on climate, on the remaining or the last climate action plan implementation. To date, about 71% of the actions called out in the 2017 Climate Action Plan have either been complete or are complete and ongoing for some of the actions. There still is, that still does leave, a significant amount of activities that we're still working on. The last Climate Action Plan had a lot of actions and a lot of actions to implement in a short period of time. But there's some that have been put on hold for lack of funding or other reasons, and some that we're still trying to implement. But the majority have been either complete or are ongoing. And some of the highlights that I wanted to mention were the joining and really even the feasibility study for CCA started as a climate action change recommendation. But joining San Diego Community Power, which is going to begin serving municipal customers in March of this year. And then it will roll out to large commercial users in June of this year. And that's great to see that starting to get set up and built out. The existing building sustainability energy ordinance, which will come into effect and was approved by the California Energy Commission, will come into effect later this month. And that's one of the first building codes that's looking at existing buildings in the state. And there already is the number of other jurisdictions that have asked to see our code and see if they can adopt similar codes for their own communities as well. The adoption of an active transportation plan. This kind of brings together our various biking and pedestrian plans. We were still able to complete, I believe, about 30 new striped bicycle lanes on Broadway, 30 miles this last in 2020. So there's still some activity being made to implement that, as well as the development of a zero waste plan and the start of a bus rapid transit from Chula Vista, specifically Eastern Chula Vista, to downtown San Diego. So those are some of the high level implementation actions that have been achieved and are helping to reduce carbon emissions. Next slide. So these, to speak to a little bit of the climate change working group process, this was a slide that we shared and was part of the climate change working group. It shows the last recommendations that were created in 2014, but it also kind of helps. This is share information that was shared with the climate change working group to kind of set their context. It's a help to guide city council and policy and funding. It's not a planning or a CEQA certified planning process, but it's really more of a guide planning process. We will still need future actions to address adaptation or other implementation. This is not the end of the story. And as I mentioned, we're still implementing the last climate action plan, but we will be coming back to Sustainability Commission and City Council with future actions to implement these recommendations. And I always like to recall that. We always try to find a balance of impact and flexibility. And I think this is shown in the recommendations and some of the language that's used in the recommendations. We definitely do have, and Commissioner Legaspi mentioned it, a very versatile climate change working group. It's not necessarily only people who would consider themselves environmentalists, or it's a wide variety of different organizations and groups. And so we always know that while there can be a desire to kind of have the most impactful policies as possible, we also want to make sure that they are, that there's flexibility in them and that it's not unduly pressuring or putting constraints on residents or businesses. And so we always want to try to find that that balance. And then we also want to help build community support. We think that these recommendations and the actions should always kind of build onto something and help the community take further actions in the process and not necessarily be the end process. And finally, this is, there's a goal to minimize general fund impacts to the city, and that's not necessarily because, to tie the hands of the climate change working group process, but really just to call out and to prioritize that if we want actions that can be implemented, shorter term and put into place sooner, with not needing to go to general fund and identify where that funding is going to come from in difficult budget years, can delay some of the action. So I think we really do want to try to minimize it where we can. That's not to say there won't be any general fund impacts, but where possible, kind of find those solutions that the city can take forward. Next slide. So I won't list all the names, but I did want to share all the names here. As Chair Legaspi mentioned, There's and as I mentioned, there's a diverse of stakeholders. I think that's really important to bring all of these stakeholders together because each of them carry a different perspective. And so we did recently or through this process expand and we included environmental stakeholders. But other than that, these are kind of the core group of members who have been working over the past 2 years or so to provide information and share their expertise with the city and each other to provide to kind of come to some consensus on the recommendations that you'll see today. Next slide. And I also wanted to, I forgot, I should have mentioned, I'll be kind of walking through a few of these slides, but I will open it up for some more conversation once we get into the review of the draft actions. So if there is comments on some of the recommendations, there will be an opportunity to provide that a little bit later in the presentation. But I also, again, wanted to just set the stage for those who are a little bit newer or haven't been following the climate change working group process. As Chair Legaspi mentioned, we started holding meetings in 2018. Those were focused on the 2017 Climate Action Plan implementation. So really kind of talking about what is the city doing to implement the existing Climate Action Plan. Then the next year we held 4 meetings with presentations on zero waste, transportation, community waste aggregation, and potential future actions. So again, learn a little bit more of learning more about bringing in subject matter experts that can provide presentations and the most recent information to our members. But then also thinking about how they want to take that and kind of put them into future actions. In 2020, oh, sorry. And then 2019, I also forgot. There was a public forum as well that was held at the 2 public forums that were held at the Otay Ranch Library and Civic Center Library. So we not only discussed it, but we opened it up to the public and let them come in and kind of provide some context as well. So that was very helpful. In 2020, we held 2 meetings, and this is where it got a little bit more challenging to hold the meetings with COVID, but we did provide a meeting on the most recent at the time greenhouse gas inventory, which was the 2016 inventory, and then also discussing and voting on new recommendations that are in front of you today. So this is just kind of to explain that there's a lot of education the members went through. It's not necessarily jump right into the action, but we're really thankful that they stuck with us, and I think it made the conversation a lot more impactful when we did get to it. Next slide. And then the last kind of process slide that I'll talk about is just kind of where we'll go next. As I mentioned, this isn't the end of the presentation or the end of the process. We'll be presenting, or we're presenting these recommendations to you today. If approved, we will then present the recommendations to City Council, and we're tentatively set to go to City Council in April and make these presentations. And then once approved, or if approved by City Council, we will then work to implement the policies and bring back those implementation policies or actions to the Sustainability Commission and back to the City Council to be implemented. So there is, like I said, a lot of work to go, but like I said, it's it's an ongoing process, and we're still bringing implementation actions to the Sustainability Commission and City Council from the last Climate Action Plan, and that won't stop as well. So we will definitely, like I said, this is really kind of a living document and a living process. Next slide. So I have here all of the recommendations. If you give me a little bit of time, I'll read through them just in case anybody's on the phone or not able to see them up here. And then I'm going to open the floor and hear from a climate change working group member. And then we'll kind of look at each of these recommendations in detail with their associated actions. So now I'm just going to kind of read through them so that everyone can kind of hear what they are and think if you have any kind of thoughts about them. But the conversation will be when we're talking more about the actions. Draft recommendation 1, approve and implement zero waste plan recommendation to eliminate the use of single-use plastics. Implement recommendation 2, implement education and outreach to support decarbonization and new construction and evaluate incentives and building code options to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions associated with building energy use. Recommendation 3, review solar permitting process and revise where necessary. Recommendation 4, implement education and outreach in support of vehicle decarbonization while evaluating appropriate codes that reduce fossil fuel usage. Recommendation 5, ensure implementation of the Chula Vista Active Transportation Plan to increase protected bike lanes or highest level of protection possible where active transportation collisions have occurred. Recommendation 6, adopt a climate equity index to address environmental and social equity. And recommendation 7, adopt a greenhouse gas reduction goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. So as I mentioned, we'll be going into each of those in more detail, but I kind of wanted to present those recommendations that were approved and voted on by the Climate Change Working Group members. Staff, as we were preparing them to bring them to the Sustainability Commission, we did make some slight tweaks. We wanted to stay within the core goal of the recommendation, but also align them with city policies or city programs that will help implement them. And so if you saw a slight version between the version that was voted on and these, that's where that's come from. But the goal was to keep the same core of those recommendations. So if you feel that's missed in any of those, let me know. With those being all stated, wanted to next slide, and we can wanted to ask if one of our Climate Change Working Group members, Fabiola, is available or is available to speak.
Yes, can you see me, hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, just double check, and apologies for the background noise in advance. It is not my almost 5-year-old, going to be one of my cats doing something, so apologize ahead of time. So good evening, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. My name is Fabiola Lau, Senior Equity Policy Manager with the Center for Sustainable Energy, and thank you, Corey, for adding that to my slide, a proud Chula Vista resident. Some of you have heard me speak before. I spoke a few months ago about the Climate Equity Index, which was also part of the stakeholder group. So I'm back to here today to talk to you about my experience as a Climate Change Working Group member. So for those of you who are not that familiar with the Center for Sustainable Energy, CSC is a 24-year-old national nonprofit headquartered here in San Diego, and we're driven by one simple mission: decarbonize. And we provide program administration, technical assistance, and policy advisement. And we serve as a trusted and objective resource helping government agencies to implement successful and sustainable energy programs that use public funds appropriately and in the best interest of their community. Our vision is a future with sustainable, equitable, and resilient transportation buildings and communities. CSC is a member of the Climate Change Working Group, representing one of the 2 environment seats in that body. And as CSC representative, I participated in the meetings that led to the development and approval of the recommendations that Corey just provided you an overview of, and that you will be discussing in detail after I speak. CSC, we appreciate staff's commitment and collaborative approach through that process. The Climate Change Working Group had extensive discussions about the recommendations, so much so that we had to schedule an additional meeting so we can wrap up our conversation and actually vote on the recommendations. We think that staff, the Center for Sustainable Energy, we think that staff did a good job in balancing the different points of views expressed by the various members of the working group. As you'll see in the comments in the online e-comment portal, all the comments submitted, which included those from various working group members, are all in support of the recommendations and potential implementation actions, which is really good. And, CSC submitted a letter to staff that was shared with you with our detailed comments, which included amendments to some of the recommendations and encouraged the addition of new potential actions. So these comments were also submitted on the e-comment platform. But just so you have it all in one place, we also submitted that letter for your review. And, from all the recommendations, given that our background is more on the clean transportation and clean energy sector, we felt that we obviously could talk about and provide insights on two recommendations given our technical expertise and involvement in those sectors. So we just wanted to share that we strongly support the second recommendation about building decarbonization in new construction and to evaluate incentives and building code options. Electrification is a cost-effective and feasible strategy to reach decarbonization in many use cases to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with building energy use. And while CSC recognizes that some combustion fuel technologies and other non-electric alternatives will play an important role in California's decarbonization pathway, these resources should be limited to end uses that currently are difficult to electrify, such as the agricultural sector, or make use of on-site fuels by capturing otherwise harmful emissions. So nevertheless, all electric residential and commercial new construction is a proven economical, clean, and safe option. So acknowledging that there are different end uses in the building sector, and given our technical expertise and organization, the Center for Sustainable Energy, we suggest include in a letter that in addition to staff evaluating building decarbonization efforts by the state and other jurisdictions, which is actually part of Action 2A, we suggest that a market analysis be conducted to evaluate the current new construction market in the city and to provide insights into how different incentives and our building code measures best align with city needs. This is something that probably staff was thinking of doing already, but we just wanted to call it out as something that we have seen in other jurisdictions that is very helpful to kind of guide that decision as to kind of what future incentives and recommendations staff can make, whether, that's an ordinance or what type of building code measure. And another recommendation that we strongly support is recommendation 4. The language there currently says vehicle decarbonization, and CSC suggests that this be changed to clean transportation. Clean transportation is a term that is used in the transportation industry and in state policies and programs, for example, in the California Energy Commission's Clean Transportation Program. And we think that by aligning with what is used in state efforts, the city of Chula Vista will be better positioning itself when applying for state funding. We, like I mentioned earlier, our technology expertise on the clean transportation sector is very vast. We are very involved in various efforts and other jurisdictions throughout the state and throughout the country, as well as in the state of California. So we can tell you that clean transportation is the term that is probably going to resonate more with people. And for the clean transportation recommendation, in addition to staff evaluating what's out there in other states and jurisdictions in this space, we suggest that staff prepare an inventory of the city's current clean transportation efforts, particularly streamlining initiatives in permitting, and also to assess how these line up to the state tool and guidebook outline or letter. Probably think that staff is not going to do this either way, but we just wanted to really, call out that it would be great for the public to see an inventory of what this city is doing and how this aligns with what the state is recommending to do or that is actually requiring to do. And, we just see that planned clean transportation initiatives such as municipal fleet electrification, which the city has already been doing a great job on, those could also be included in the inventory, and also opportunities for complementary actions where, it could be identified. And just lastly, we applaud the city of Chula Vista for developing the Climate Equity Index, and we strongly support its adoption as indicated in recommendation 6. As I mentioned when I started speaking, I was a member of the stakeholder group that helped develop the Climate Equity Index, and we really appreciated staff's commitment to including equity into the climate action plan. This climate equity index will help ensure that communities that have been disproportionately impacted by pollution and climate change will be prioritized in the implementation of our city's climate action plan. And just furthermore, I just wanted to call out to the Climate Actions Campaign recommendations to add a social equity section in the 2021 CAP update. And I just wanted to share the Center for Sustainable Energy supports that. So that is for my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions whenever it is that if you have any questions for me.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Fabiola. Like you said, it's always great when we not only get to hear from subject matter experts, but also Chula Vista residents. So thank you very much for sharing the comments and e-comments as well as in the letter. And from a staff's, just a quick response, if you were looking at those e-comments, I would say that staff did or do anticipate conducting that inventory as part of those evaluations. But that being said, we think it's also fine to specifically call out that that is a step that the public would want to see to kind of make it more clear. So we're happy to incorporate the potential recommendations that were referenced in the letter in the recommendation actions for the relevant recommendation actions. So perfect. Well, with that, I will jump right into it and ask for next slide. And the first recommendation, again, this is the recommendation to approve or implement zero waste plan recommendation to eliminate the use of single-use plastics. And so we have some implementation actions related to our studying the impacts of the single-use plastic ban, presenting the ordinance for the elimination to City Council, and then preparing a multi-year educational campaign on the benefits of single-use plastic or eliminating single-use plastics. So kind of the study put in place and then market around the benefits of that. We didn't receive any outside comments for this action, and so I wanted to kind of open up the conversation, see if commission members had any comments or questions on this recommendation and the actions.
I had a question of why you have multi-year in item C. You're anticipating this is going to cover what, 3, 5, 10? How long does multi-year look like?
I don't know if we have a specific number of years for that, but more so that's the multi-year is really just to get at it's an ongoing effort, and it's something that will take definitely longer than a year to do.
Well, I guess I might suggest that having at least some targets, say 50% impact in the first year or 60%, and then at least have some sort of a target for completion of this implementation rather than leaving it open-ended.
Well, and so that is the multi-year educational campaign. The ordinance will be ongoing, and it will be, once it's adopted, it will be in place, and that's not a limited. Really, what that recommendation is just about is saying that we're committing to the educational campaign for more than 1 year, if that makes sense.
So maybe I asked the question about the wrong item. Then under B, are you going to have a set of targets as to when you could expect to have the majority of businesses remove this from the waste stream? Or how does that ordinance get put together that you can educate on it?
Yes, I'm not particularly familiar with the implementation schedule of that ordinance. I don't know, Manuel, if we have that information yet, or if we have potential goals.
So we are working with Surfrider in producing this, and we have it stepped out by the first year, first 6 months, and it's implemented in stages too. So we are working on that currently. And as for the education portion of it, that will be ongoing. I mean, you have to start from grade school on up. So as well as all the businesses and restaurants and so on. But as for, like you were saying, Commissioner Richardson, we do have stages, and that It's just a matter of waiting for COVID to end before we could really start implementing this. And there will be penalties that we are putting in there and raising fees for the bags, plastic bags at the stores, things like that, that are going into this whole food or zero waste plan.
So is there a projected date to submit this to the council? I guess,
Well,
you say it's still being written in terms of the details of it.
yes, we're getting down to the final details, but we were hoping to have it. There's a whole stage process of going to council. We have to do some public outreach on it first before it goes to council. But we're working on that right now, and it's just a matter of getting past COVID to get this going. It's something that we wish we could have had last year. In fact, at the end of last year, it was supposed to already been at council, but unfortunately, that isn't the case. But
Okay.
we have the opt-out program right now going on, so that's one way we could work with it. We could do our deed right now, word of mouth.
Yeah. But I will, I'll touch base with the staff who are working on this and see if we can add some more information about potential timelines when we bring it forward in front of City Council.
I'd also like to add that as this is part of our soon-to-be adopted zero waste plan as well, in the zero waste plan, we do have a timeline as to this being a short to mid-year action. So it does actually have a timeline on there. Now, as far as the question as to when or if we could predict when a certain percentage of businesses are in compliance, that's really difficult to predict when it comes to ordinances of this type or any ordinance for that matter.
But yeah, I guess I wasn't saying prediction. That was setting targets. There's nothing wrong with setting targets.
Yes, we do. It's in our timeline.
Okay, all right.
And one of the reasons why it kind of got postponed is the governor had an order. So all these other cities that actually have the zero waste or the ban on single-use plastics, it's been exempt, I guess, by the governor's order.
That's correct.
Oh.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So it sounds like, again, we'll kind of, work to provide some more information on the timeline. And I think a lot of that will be in the zero waste plan. But it doesn't sound like there's any, or I should ask if there's any other recommendations or questions on the actions. If not, we can move on to the second recommendation. I think there'll be plenty of conversations though. Okay, perfect. So perfect. This is recommendation number 2, implement education and outreach to support decarbonization and new construction and evaluate incentives and building code options to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions associated with building energy use. So this is where we talk about developing a outreach campaign to promote decarbonization, and those are spotlight model decarbonization projects that are already happening within Chula Vista. There already is a number of developers who are developing all electric or decarbonized developments, and so we just wanted to start by kind of showcasing what's already out there and what's available. While that, we wanted, or in addition to that, we wanted to evaluate other jurisdictions and state decarbonization efforts and present at a public event to solicit feedback. So this is where staff would envision doing that inventory of different state policies and different actions that other jurisdictions are taking and kind of share them in a public way. But I would say that we can add the recommendation or the recommended action from Center for Sustainable Energy's letter to also include an additional inventory as its own action. And we can kind of create that as we're preparing for that public event. But the goal here is to really take a look around at what the state's doing, what other jurisdictions are doing, and hear from our public what they want to hear. And so that's the goal of that action. And then the final is based on the evaluation and public input, prepare a decarbonization recommendation to City Council, which could include amendments to code or procedures. So kind of taking it the next step, we've heard from the city members what we want to do. Now let's prepare that for City Council. One thing I would kind of add to this, and as I was listening to the conversation about the wanting to work with the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition, I thought that these actions could be a really great place to kind of encourage some of that work. And to be fair, I would say that we definitely will be working with them to evaluate. They're very familiar with what other jurisdictions are doing and the state is doing. So we definitely will be working with them to prepare that evaluation, and we anticipate they'll be very active in the public, providing public comment to our public event. But I think that the other kind of effort, and let me know if this kind of gets at what you were thinking about, Chair Matthias, but it's kind of I was thinking to add an action that would just state hold regular, maybe quarterly, stakeholder meetings with relevant stakeholders, such as the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. The other two that come to mind would be SDG&E and San Diego Community Power. But and others. There definitely could be others who would wish to join that. I could think of some equity organizations that would be interested in that conversation as well. But to kind of have make it more a formal process and a more regular process, so the stakeholders know, okay, once per whatever time we decide, we're going to get a chance to speak with city staff and present them the most recent information that we have.
I think that would be great.
Okay, perfect. That's good. That's
Yes,
good to hear.
Absolutely.
So, perfect. And so I can't, like I said, I can't make the comments on the slide up here, but I have made notes for that. And so when you vote, you'll be voting on the kind of recommendations as amended by comments, and I'll include that one in there. So with that being said, wanted to see if there was any other additional questions or other comments on this recommendation or actions.
I have a couple questions. One is, I don't see anything in your implementation actions to address the incentives item that's in the action item. It basically talks about evaluate and look at, come up with a plan, but there's nothing about the incentives piece. And also, in linking this to item number 6, there's discussion about new construction and getting solar panels and so forth. There needs to be something in this that basically takes the community that's the most impacted under your index and saying we need to do some support, some incentives, potentially some locating grant money or something, so that many of the residential properties that are in West Chula Vista can actually get some solar panels. It shouldn't just be the new construction out east. I think that's not really implementing an equitable situation. So there needs to be something on the incentives. There needs to be something on providing some benefits to the people who can't afford the new houses and who can't afford the installation of solar panels. We need to be doing something about that if we're really going to be serious about this. Yeah,
so thanks. That's a really good comment. Thank you. I will say that anytime we're talking about finding incentives, generally that's general fund money. That can be, it's not something that we can just necessarily add and assume that we'll be able to do it just because we want to. But I think that we can definitely add. That's I would say that's something up to City Council, and so we can definitely.
You're asking us to make a recommendation to City Council, so it's not up to City Council. If this commission says we recommend that you take an action to do the following, then you ought to take forward that's what this commission is recommending the City Council do. We're not deferring to them to take an action if we have something we feel should be pursued.
Yes, but so in that situation, if the recommendation is, provide incentives from general fund dollars, as the ultimate members who have to balance the general fund, that might be something that they would really like to do. And we can, like I said, we can pass along that as an action. But at the end of the day, I think it's all important that we know that, the city doesn't have surplus budget to invest necessarily. And so, there is opportunities for grant funds, and we're definitely pursuing those, and we'll pursue them more with the Climate Equity Index. But it's not, just because we say we want incentives doesn't necessarily mean that those will be supported by the budget. If they have to make some very difficult decisions when balancing the budget, and this year is no different. But that being said, we can definitely work and follow up with you, Commissioner, to kind of make sure the language is correct and recommending and that the Sustainability Commission would like to see some budget set aside for incentives if that's the desire.
Well, I don't know. It wouldn't necessarily even have to be the general fund. It could be, I'm not sure what the restrictions are on the proposition money that's available. I'm not sure what restrictions there would be on getting grant funds. There may be funds available from state sources. I think you're being a little narrow-sighted here, saying the general fund is the only thing that potentially could offer incentives. It just seems like it's not being very aggressive. And if you really want to reduce greenhouse gases and achieve some equity for the community, I think you've got to be more aggressive than what you're being here.
Sure, and I like I said, I think we can definitely.
Corey, can I jump in? Commissioner Richardson, you make some really good points with regards to the equity, and it is something certainly that we should take a look at. One of the things that we've mentioned before is our role is our role is to be supportive, but we also want to help the commission make some informed decisions based on our analysis and recommendations. So should this be the desire of the commission, our recommendation would be, have staff go and conduct some research, take a look at it, and come back with some recommendations before you take any action.
Well,
Corey, if I may, just to clarify what you were talking about earlier about one of the recommendations of the Center for Sustainable Energy about the inventory. The inventory was for the recommendation of the vehicles. For this one, recommendation 2, we're talking about a market analysis, and I think that's what Commissioner Gillespie was getting at, the market analysis to evaluate what's the current construction market and also look at how different incentives and our building code measures best align with the city needs. So, and yes, with the incentives, I know that you were looking at state and other local jurisdictions. So I just wanted to clarify that one of the recommendations was actually to try to address this, try to do a market analysis to see what's out there and how that could fit with the city.
Yeah, so like I said, I think, as we evaluate the jurisdictions and the state decarbonization efforts, we'll definitely identify new or potential funding sources that are available. And so I think that's something that we can, is a part of this, but that we can strengthen. Although it's also important to keep in mind that, as grants change, it's not necessarily the same thing that they're looking to incentivize. A lot of grants are moving away from solar and looking more at electrification or fuel switching. And so there's a variety of different opportunities out there. But staff are always open and looking for different opportunities, and where possible, we're happy to incorporate those.
I guess just final comment, then I'll step out. The presentation we heard last time, and I raised the question, you just kind of reopened it. Simply switching fuels from gas to electric is not going to save money for the homeowner. I just flat out say that's the case. If you're in fact going to get to an all-electric condition, you need to add some solar, because there's no way at this particular point, even if you take the 2 to 3% deduction in cost of energy that you're going to get from the community power, you still have a substantial differential of 1 to 29 ratio of therms to kilowatt hours. And that's a tough thing to say, well, we're going to get that all in energy efficiencies. Even switching out a heat pump for a furnace without replacing all the windows, sealing all that stuff up, you're never going to get the kind of efficiencies that are rated. So I think you need to be really clear that you're going to get to an all-electric condition only when you're having it in combination with solar. You're not going to get it otherwise. It's going to cost too much for the homeowner to do it on a conversion basis.
Yeah, and I think that's, you mentioned, I think one of the big considerations there is the energy efficiency. If we're upgrading a gas appliance with something that's 2 to 3 times more efficient with an electric heat pump, you can just drive down the total amount of electricity that you need to do that. And I should say that that's a lot of what we've seen from the utility programs are supporting kind of the energy efficiency approach. I don't think I've seen any of the utilities supporting solar panels through decarbonization. But
of course not, because they're selling you power. You can go to a 1/3 the energy use on efficiency, which is what most of these things are rated, but that still does not overcome a 1 to 29 ratio of kilowatts and therms. You can basically get down to, well, maybe 10 to 1 on the most efficient appliances, but you then apply the rates, the therm rate versus the kilowatt hour rate. You still do not save money for somebody who is actually having to make that kind of conversion. The mathematics does not work. And I would challenge the group that was trying to say it's cheaper, that they need to go back and do their homework, because I think they're selling something which is inaccurate.
Sure, and I think that's also a big part of what this evaluation will kind of be looking at more closely. I will say that there, we definitely do anticipate solar playing a role in the decarbonization, and I think programs like grid alternatives that work to supply low or no cost solar systems to low-income homeowners are really great and will play an important role in our policy. So I think a lot of, I think you are hitting the nail on the head, which is, there will be a challenge, and I think bill impacts will be something that we'll be looking at very closely. And so yeah, I think that you're definitely raising good issues, and those will also be evaluated and through the process as well.
Okay, I have no additional comments.
This is Commissioner Ball, and I just wanted to really report what Commissioner Richardson is saying, because we had the same discussion last time, and I was confounded to, I didn't think that the cost for gas could compare to electricity. Having that experience myself, where frequently I've been evaluated for whether or not my house could save if I had solar panels, and given that I have so many appliances that are gas, it never works out. In fact, people just hang the phone up on me. They're like, "Oh, never mind, you're not a good candidate." So I thought the presenter the last time was going to come back with some information on that. I forget who the presenter was, but when he made the statement and Commissioner Richardson questioned him, he said he'd come back. And that's it.
Any other actions or questions or recommended actions? Okay. So,
Corey, for the record, there are, is there an actual recommendation to add to the discussion here to the text, or is it?
So yes, what I was going to say is just to kind of summarize the implementation actions. We will be adding the implementation action to hold a regular stakeholder meeting with relevant stakeholders such as the San Diego Building Energy, Building Electrification Coalition. And then also adding the recommendation, or the action recommended by Center for Sustainable Energy to create an index, the market study index, that will then kind of feed into the evaluation, but wanted to add those two as recommendations. And if there is kind of consensus from the commission about adding another action that specifically calls out providing incentives, we can add that as well. You know, these will be presented to the city council, and so like I said, they might have input on some of those, but but like I said, we're happy to kind of pass those along.
Do you want a motion? I would certainly recommend you have an item D on there regarding the incentives, and that's for the existing housing. That's not new construction.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking of motion. I just wanted to, as long as none of the commissioners oppose that, adding that, we can add that.
I support that.
Support that.
Okay.
Before you go on to number 3, I do apologize. I have a meeting tonight, so I'm going to bug out. Unfortunately, this is perfect. I mean, this is where I wanted to come in and make some comments. But Vice Gillespie knows my concerns on number 3, and he'll input for me, and he will also close the meeting. So I do appreciate it, everyone's patience with me. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. If there's no other comments on this one. Perfect. So this was a recommendation about reviewing solar permitting process and revise where necessary. Our solar permits are streamlined according to state law. Many of the kind of common contractors that regularly pull solar permits will get next day permits or online permits, and so that where possible that has been streamlined. But we've still heard, especially from the comment from the climate change working group member, Rich Diascoli, that's in the e-comment section, about how the permitting process may limit the size of specifically commercial solar panels. And so we wanted to really dive into and review the discretionary permits that may limit the ability for full commercial deployment of solar systems. And kind of really address that and see if there are ways that we can either change the code or provide other incentives to help those types of projects. Was there any questions or recommended actions?
I had one question. The permits, are they flat permits, or do you have them per kilowatt hour, per panel? What do you know what the permit structure is today?
I believe it's a flat fee, and I think it is capped by the state law. I'm not familiar with what that is, but I believe it is a flat fee that is capped.
Okay, so the only problem with that is you may again adversely affect the small panels. The comment was about the large installations. If you're talking about small installations in homes of say 1 to 3 kilowatt, really small kind of installations, you could actually have a very basic regressive fee structure if you don't have some method for those residential properties to have a smaller permit fee if they got a smaller system. So just as a kind of a thing to think about.
Okay, yeah, and like I said, I believe, again, that the state caps the amount that we can charge for solar permits, and I think it was set with those kind of smaller permits and you know, I would also say that, you know, that's for the kind of more streamlined permits. I think one of the issue in here that we're kind of trying to wrestle with is, you know, typically streamlining means that, you know, the project is already defined and we kind of understand how it works, and there's not a lot of custom calculations that go into place. But on the other side of that, some of the commercial sites can be really complex and kind of look into a little more of that, or need some of that custom calculation. So, you know, we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can allow for kind of a, for lack of a better term, like an advanced streamlining where, yes, there still will be some opportunity, or there will be a need for some, you know, custom calculations or getting some information that's not completely standard, but it still is a smoother process, and a process that you know, from what I would like to see is a process that an average user can participate For example, we've heard that to do a larger system, you would need to file a variance, and that can be a complex process. So how can we kind of but streamline that process so we're still able to get the important information that we need for those complex systems while still making it user friendly and minimizing cost for the applicants. That's our goal for this. But that's a good comment about the smaller users systems, and we'll make sure that this wouldn't negatively impact them.
I just have a comment on behalf of our chair, Tina, and that is that she had solar panels installed 3 months ago, and she's still waiting for the switch to get turned on. So I'm not exactly sure. It sounds more of an SDG&E issue, and that may be something that we, as a city, can put a little pressure because it's not just her, but she said she knows a lot of people. And it is a big concern. I mean, when you go out and you make this investment and then, it's taking more than 3 months, and who knows when it's going to get resolved. It might get improved once we get to community power. But I think when we get to community power, based on what we're hearing now is that there's going to have some really nice incentives for solar. So we're going to really have to step up and put some pressure on the utility company to help with that. I know I hear this being an issue, not just in our county and in other jurisdictions, but it's a comment, but I'm not exactly sure if we're able to add an action item, if it's not really the city, but sounds like it's more of an SDG&E issue, or that's was holding her her installation. And it's already everything set up, but it's just a matter of flipping the switch, and yeah, very concerning.
I would agree. That's very concerning. I do believe that is more of an SDG&E issue, and so what I would recommend is staff will look into that a little bit more, and if there is something under city control that we can do to streamline the process or impact the process in any way, we can add a recommendation to this or an action related to that to this recommendation. But it might be a process that's a little bit out of the city's hands and more in the utilities' hands. But like I said, we'll definitely follow up with SDG&E and learn more about that and see if we can minimize that.
Do you happen to know right now if what the time frame is for permitting solar panels? Because I know 3 years ago, I would imagine there's just a lot more people now, but 3 years ago, or with 2016, I got mine installed, and it was very rapid. I mean, it was.
Yeah, I think
it was within a month.
I think they said that the most permits are returned within 1 to 3 days, I believe it was. And so, again, I think those are for the most projects that are kind of standard projects. They're pretty quick, but where there can be some more complex issues, that's I think where we're running into, or where we've seen some challenges. And then like I said, that I think that the activation issue is not is out of the city's hands, but I'll definitely look into that a little bit more, and if there is a city related action to help that process, I can add it to these actions.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. Next slide. So this initially started as a kind of or I should say, initially this recommendation started combined with the decarbonization of buildings. And that's why you see the vehicle decarbonization, which no one in the vehicle or transportation sector uses. So I would, and if there's, if there is any concern, let me know. But I fully support changing support of vehicle decarbonization to support of clean transportation. But this is again evaluating what we can do to support the transportation, clean transportation initiatives in the city. And so very similar process, and we could, we could even combine these outreach or evaluation processes depending on kind of their workflow and if the timing lines up. But again, develop and initiate comprehensive outreach promoting decarbonization, spotlighting the businesses and residents who have already taken that effort, and showcasing why they're happy that they've gone that route. Evaluate other jurisdictions and state decarbonization efforts. Again, similar to the building codes. These are, looking at other clean transport. Evaluate state, and this would be clean transportation efforts. So we'll be looking at the rollout of electric vehicles, and one area where the city has a lot of responsibility related to that is the permitting of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So in addition to these actions that you see here, I also think that we can incorporate the recommended action from Center for Sustainable Energy that talks about doing that market analysis as well as the evaluation, and calls out some of the guides that we should be comparing that analysis to, which is very helpful. So I think we can add that as a part of this evaluation. And then once we've evaluated and created that market analysis and received feedback from the public, we would bring some clean transportation recommendations to City Council, which could include amendments to code or procedures. So that's kind of like I said, very similar to recommendation number 2, but looking more at transportation and seeing what the opportunities are there. Any questions or new implementation actions? Okay. So hearing that, with the change of vehicle decarbonization to clean transportation and the addition of the implementation action recommended by a Center for Sustainable Energy, we can move forward on this. Next slide. Perfect. This is draft recommendation number 5, is looking at the transportation and really prioritizing the increased protected bike lanes, especially where active transportation collisions have occurred. And so to do this, there's already an adopted plan of the alternative transportation plan, and so just making sure that that's receiving the support it needs to be implemented, as well as conducting a community survey to evaluate perceived active transportation safety. So that's really more about reaching out to the community, trying to identify, we see the collisions and for, the kind of the grim stats and know where some of those things happen, but we don't always see the near misses or challenges that active community transportation or active transportation has in our community. So just wanted to kind of provide that opportunity for feedback in the process. And then also working with our engineering department to prepare, adopt, and implement a local road safety plan, which seeks to implement really focused on decreasing collisions and increasing safety of roads. And it already has a good stakeholder network or stakeholder group that is providing input on that plan process, but it fits nicely into this recommendation as well. Any questions or proposed new actions?
I have one question on this one as well. There was a plan at one time to try to expedite or to try to improve the throughput of traffic along the corridors, H Street, Telegraph Canyon, and so forth. That would decrease the amount of carbon of idling vehicles sitting at stoplights. I'm not sure whether that's already covered in a previous set of recommendations. That's part of the transportation, active transportation, is to reduce the amount of idling of vehicles at stoplights. So is that somewhere in the works? Is that where does that stand?
So I do know in the 2017 Climate Action Plan, there was a number of traffic signal synchronizations that took place in recent years. I I can't remember specifically if they occurred at those locations you mentioned, but I do know that we've done a number of thoroughfare synchronizations, and I know that they will, or they're. I shouldn't say. I believe that they are working on continuing that, and it's kind of an ongoing process, but I'm not positive. Yeah.
Hey, Corey, this is Dennis. Commissioner Richardson, I can provide you some information on that. As part of the city's traffic signals communications master plan, which is under the umbrella of our smart cities, there's a roadmap in terms of deployment of adaptive traffic signals. So as of right now, there's 29 signals that have been deployed across the city with the plan to expand that in additional locations.
And any idea how many of those locations actually exist?
I don't know at this point. What I do know is that they've currently deployed 29 with a plan to expand those.
Yeah.
I kind of think that would be best kind of kept with the 2017 action, since this is really just more focused on the active transportation, but
no, that's fine.
Okay.
Since we're talking about reduction in greenhouse gases.
Yep.
That's transportation's your number one source of just making sure that doesn't get lost in the shuffle, particularly if we're talking about short general funds, and if we're 29, I don't know how many intersections there are that could be synchronized, but that sounds like a very small number. And if the city budget is affected by this, we may have some difficulties even achieving the 2017 goals.
Yeah, like I said, hopefully those we'll be able to, and I think that's one area where we try to make sure that the recommendations that we have are recommendations that we can put in place. And like I said, I know that effort's ongoing. So yeah, I'd say we could follow up with that as kind of a climate action plan implementation item. And just if there's interest down the road, circle back on implementation of that. Let me make a note.
I have a question about the wording. It says increase protected bike lanes or highest level of protection possible. So does that mean not a bike lane?
Yeah, and so I think that's a really good question. Thank you for asking. That means it might not be a protected bike lane. So in the climate change working group process, I think one of the ideas that especially the biking stakeholders and transportation stakeholders wanted to kind of get across is that, yes, bike lanes are good. We like having striped bike lanes, but it's really the protected bike lanes that are going to make more people feel safe and more comfortable to get out and to utilize a bike or other transportation. And so initially it just said increase protected bike lanes, but as we were learning more about the process and kind of how you put in protected bike lanes, we found out that there's portions of the city, especially on the western portions, that have a lot of driveways into access points on the busy thoroughfares. The one they were thinking here was Broadway. Where you have those driveway access points, every driveway would have to be a kind of a hole in the protection for the bike lane so that someone can kind of get in and out of that driveway. And so where those and that highest level of protection possible, where that language comes in is to say, don't just don't give up on those portions of the city. Try to get as protected as possible, whether that's slowing down the traffic or changing some other things to make it, even if it's not protected, still providing as much protection as you can. And so that's where that kind of that balance comes in. We want to increase protected bike lanes, but if it's just not physically possible or very advantageous to put in a protected bike lane, what are the other levels of protection that you can provide there?
Okay, and then it says where active transportation's collisions have occurred. So does this mean only in highlighted areas, or is this trying to just emphasize those areas?
Again, that's a very good question. And I think we could change some of or reword the recommendation. It was really, it should say especially where active transportation collisions have occurred. And what again, the comment from the biking community was, you know, unfortunately, we have some very grim statistics on where, what portions of the city need an infrastructure and need to have, new solutions provided. And they really wanted to focus in on that in an effort to, decrease, provide the protected bike lanes, decrease the collisions so that more people feel safe in taking advantage of these opportunities. But it wasn't meant to necessarily say only or exclusively where active transportation collisions have occurred. And so I think we can make it clear that it was that was supposed to be a focus where active transportations have included, but it wasn't supposed to be exclusive.
Yeah, I just recognize the large development plans that are happening in East Chula Vista and want to voice my desire to have these sorts of things thoroughly thought through so that we don't run into the same problems that we have in West Chula Vista.
Yeah, no, like I said, thank you. Those are good comments. And as I, just kind of where we're as a quick change is adding adding some language that says ensuring implementation of the Chula Vista active transportation plan to increase protected bike lanes or highest level protection, focusing on where active transportation collisions have occurred. So it's showing that that's where the focus is, but not the only efforts that the city will be doing. Perfect. Okay, that's good feedback. Thank you very much. Any other questions or suggested recommendations or actions?
Well, Corey, I got to say, looking back at our meetings that we had, this was a really hot item. It was a big issue. It was people were very passionate about this, including myself. And I'm just here looking at the climate action campaign letter that was submitted. And I really think we need to be very aggressive on this. I'd like to see us put some specific caps or some goals on it. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's in the recommendation that was made, and he's also a member of our climate action or our climate change working group. Is it possible to put some kind of goals, something kind of in alignment with what the city of San Diego is doing as far as promoting or putting some targets?
Yeah, so they do recommend that in the climate action plan that we add more mode share targets. I can say that along with the city of San Diego and other jurisdictions, finding the data to support those mode share targets is a challenge. But we do plan on trying to evaluating those, and I think one of the potential actions that we could include would be just that, to evaluate potential mode share targets, and maybe hold like a public forum similar to the building decarbonization or vehicle decarbonization evaluations that we do. Would that be? Because it's, like I said, it's something that we will be looking at as we create the more fleshed out climate action plan. But I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of spelling it out under as an action here as well.
Yeah, let's perform some kind of evaluation and come up with some targets, something that that we can give to the planning people and say, hey, this is an important issue. It was brought up. It's something I hear about all the time.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that comment. And thank you to Noah for filing the letter for that comment. It's very helpful, and always good to, yeah, always good to add that. So, and so what I'll add is, or when you see the updated recommendations, final recommendations, it will be evaluate. And like I said, I also really like the idea of holding a public input opportunity for this as well. So evaluate and hold public event to collect feedback on specific mode shift targets. Yeah, so I think that, from a staff perspective, I always want to make sure, my big concern there is if we set a target, do we have the data to evaluate if we're getting to that target? But I think this balances that with the evaluation. Okay, well, thank you much, Chair Gaspy. Any other comments or questions?
Can you recap what is being added to this one?
Absolutely. So in addition to the 3 actions that you have listed up in front of you, there'll be an action D that will be evaluate specific mode shift targets and hold public event to collect feedback. Is where I'm at right now. But if there's any other changes to that, let me know. And it will probably get made to look and sound a little bit better before we take it to City Council. But that's the goal, is to that, again, evaluate what mode shift targets are available out there, what can we track, and then hold that public event once we've kind of held some of that initial, or done some of that initial evaluation, to say, here's what we found so far. How does this align with what the public and the active transportation community would like to see from us? And so that's where before we just go, or before we kind of adopt it, that we can get that feedback loop. Did that sound good?
Yes, and then just the actual recommendation to read, especially locations where active transportation collisions have occurred.
Yep. Sorry. Yep. And then we'll be adding that, focusing on where active transportations have occurred.
Right. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Next slide. This is one where I did make the text in red is a slight change, again, just to kind of get at what we were trying to come across with the recommendations. But this is for adopting a climate equity index to address environmental and social equity. And one of the implementation actions was launch an initiative to embed equity in city operations. The first action talked more about a citywide initiative, and that was a little bit ambiguous. And so after getting some feedback, we wanted to kind of really have it be focused in on, we want, yes, we want it to be citywide and we want to bring in the community, but we really want to focus on how is the city doing its standard operations, and how can we embed equity in that a little bit better. And then also implement climate equity index recommendations, which you've seen a draft of from the last presentation, and at the next month's Sustainability Commission meeting, you'll be seeing the full report with these recommendations to provide input as well. But basically, they lay out a number of recommendations, from additional outreach to communities, finding additional funding and grants for communities, and just really trying to focus city support for those high-scoring communities. But basically, the recommendation or the action will be to do what the index calls for.
Corey, you said the high-scoring communities, it sounds like the difference between the city of San Diego's definition of high scoring and Chula Vista's is still going to be different?
Yes, yes, the city of San Diego did do a different scoring approach where they just looked at the top. They basically pulled the actual numbers and said, if you scored between this, 1 and so X, you're in this category. Whereas we looked at followed the Cal EnviroScreen model of looking at the percentages of scoring. So if you scored in the top percentage, it's important to point out that the Climate Equity Index raw scores are not comparable across city efforts, just because of the different way in which census tracts, number of census tracts, as well as data that goes into the census tracts is calculated. But you could compare or be more able to compare, the top like 25% of census tracts or something of that nature. So we think that there still is some way to do some, comparison and kind of aligning them. But it wouldn't be based on just the hard scores, because those are subjective to the individual cities in which they were created. Any other questions or potential actions?
I just have a question about the report that was going to go along with the study. Could you give us an update on where that stands?
Yeah, so that report, like I said, I'll be presenting that at the next March Sustainability Commission. And we'll be soliciting feedback. It is drafted, and we'll be sending a copy earlier, at least a week before, like we did with the Climate Change Working Group recommendations. It's still the same information as the last report that you saw, but it has a lot of more context around it. It's a much more user-friendly format in the report. So we're excited to share that with you and the other community members. And then we anticipate taking it to, if approved by a Sustainability Commission, taking it to City Council either in March or April.
Sounds good.
I guess I had one additional question. The terms social equity and environmental equity are now in here at the Climate Equity Index. Did it also address social equity? I'm not sure I remember that term.
I don't believe we had a definition of social equity in there. And that's a good yeah, I think the recommendation was that we want it to be a little bit more encompassing than just climate equity. But I don't think we have defined social equity.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
That'd be good.
Okay. Let me, if there's not a readily available definition, I will reach out.
Yeah, it seems like the second part of this statement should align with whatever's written in the report as the goal of the report.
So we maybe just
I don't know what that is at this point.
Yeah, and so I guess we could change it to it really is focused on climate equity, and so we could say that we want to adopt the Climate Equity Index to address
disproportionate impacts of climate change, maybe.
Yeah,
that sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. I think that to me that sounds good. Let me just make a note. Okay. Yeah, I think that like I said, if there's if I hear some others from the climate equity stakeholder groups that have concerns about that, I can we'll follow up with the commission. But I think that change sounds good. So now the recommendation will be adopt a climate equity index to address disproportional impacts of climate change with the two actions below. Okay, any last questions or comments? If not, we have definitely last but not least is the seventh recommendation, which looks at adopting a greenhouse gas reduction goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. We did receive a comment letter that we forwarded on from Climate Action Campaign, who recommended, in addition to some of the kind of more climate action plan elements, they did recommend changing this recommendation to a carbon zero goal by 2045. So really quickly, before I review the actions, I'll kind of explain a little bit about the difference between carbon neutrality and carbon zero. But really, either way, the actions will stay pretty similar in how we address it, just as the endpoint changes a little bit. So a carbon neutrality goal by 2045 is a goal that also takes into account carbon sequestration. So if if we in 2045, if we got to a point where we were releasing X amount of, or as a community, X amount of carbon was being released into the atmosphere from our activities, to be carbon neutral, we would then also have to document how an equal amount of carbon was being sequestered annually. And I would, this is where I would say in Chula Vista. But we would also kind of take into account that carbon that's being pulled out of the atmosphere and sequestered in trees or soil or other products. The Climate Action Campaign letter did and specifically mentioned or recommended against the use of carbon offsets. And I think that is good feedback. Although to be fair, that's not necessarily what our carbon neutrality goal was looking to do. I can say, that's not something that we've had discussions about is using offsets because our climate action plan is not a CEQA certified document. It does not confer development streamlining to any of our development projects in the city. And so, none of the talk about a goal would necessarily carry down to developers, or how we wanted to reach a goal would impact developers or allow them to use offsets. It's really more about how we want to achieve our goals. And like I said, we're not, or personally, I don't think there's much support for using offsets that come from outside of Chula Vista. If there is opportunities for Chula Vista offsets, I think those are an interesting opportunity. But using non-local offsets, to me, it doesn't seem appropriate, and specifically because that means someone else is getting those benefits. I want those benefits here in Chula Vista. And so that's our kind of use of the carbon neutrality. Whereas a carbon zero is just that. It means you're not emitting carbon, or you've driven it down as low as you can go. I think similar to a zero waste plan, we'll have to see if there's a little bit of opportunity. A zero waste plan doesn't mean you're necessarily eliminating waste. You're minimizing it, below 90%. So there might be a little bit of flexibility with carbon zero as well. I think both carbon neutrality by 2045 or a carbon zero goal by 2025 are both ambitious. It is a more long-term goal, and so it's not something that we're going to necessarily. We still have to figure out how we're going to quantify our carbon neutrality and really, figure out how to do some better forecasting to get back, or to forecast, 20 or so odd years in the future. But that will be something that we anticipate, whether it's carbon neutrality or carbon zero. doing through the implementation actions that are listed here. The last thing I'll mention on the difference between the carbon neutrality and carbon zero, for me, from a staff perspective, I think the most important thing is actually, that they both, it's a downward trajectory towards zero emissions. And the goal is clearly stated that it's not, a percent below a reduction or, something like that, but that you want to, eliminate carbon. And whether that's a net zero carbon emissions taking into account sequestration or just zero carbon emissions. From a planning perspective, I think both will send a strong signal to our community and community developers and city leaders about the goal of driving down emissions as low as we can. And so, like I said, we envision hosting a public carbon neutrality and climate emergency stakeholder meeting, kind of, like I said, bringing in some more stakeholders to address, this is a big new focus, or not necessarily new focus, but I'd say the big next step in our climate action planning process. And we want to make sure that we're reaching out and bringing in stakeholders along the way. After that, we can develop a resolution of carbon neutrality. So kind of have City Council look at something and more formally adopt a carbon neutrality or carbon zero goal. Also working with the Sustainability Commission for a potential climate emergency declaration, which I think these go very hand in hand together. Again, it's really looking at the long-term picture of where do we want to go. Then, I think one thing that the city has done well is kind of practicing what it preaches, and we've seen significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from our municipal operations. But we can also, if we have a community carbon neutrality or carbon zero goal, we can also adopt that for our municipal operations as well, so we can begin implementing these in our buildings as well. And then, not finally, but additionally, adopt a resolution presenting industrial fossil fuel infrastructure. And some conversations since the recommendations that were sent out last Monday. This was really something that was brought to our attention through our mayor, and something that was really focused on the more of the industrial, non-user focused side of fossil fuel infrastructure, wells, pipelines, refineries, and that type of equipment. But we could adopt a resolution preventing that type of fossil fuel infrastructure. And then also meet with city departments and stakeholders to create a municipal and community carbon neutrality action plan or carbon zero action plan. This, I would say, it's kind of like would be at the next big climate action plan. Depending on how much, depending on, I think it makes sense to not just push all of that, try to create all of that in this upcoming climate action plan, but really in this next climate action plan, kind of call out what the next one will be. And so that's where, that's an ongoing process. As we're implementing one, we're thinking about the next one, but that's where we would be kind of calling out that next step to take. So open for questions or input on potential actions, or input for the recommendation and Center for Climate Action Campaign's recommendation for a carbon zero goal.
I guess I have one comment that follows up on my earlier questions about incentives and so forth. It seems like if the city is going to commit to a carbon neutrality, but yet continue to develop new developments throughout the undeveloped areas in East Chula Vista, why wouldn't developers, if there's be required to estimate, well, we're going to increase the amount of carbon emissions with this development by X, whatever that calculation is, and then have them turn around and say, okay, we will retrofit so many properties in West Chula Vista with solar panels or whatever to offset that, and therefore declare they're carbon neutral in their development. It seems to be a very specific kind of thing, which goes right to the heart of the issue of equity, of all the issues we talked about before, and also says you actually have a concrete method of measuring whether you're being neutral or not. It's not going to be a guess.
Yeah, I think if there was a kind of a verifiable approach that developer wanted to take to to do that type of carbon neutral development, we would definitely support it, and I think that could play a really good role in potential actions to achieve carbon neutrality.
Well, you just said if a developer wanted to do that, I guess I'm suggesting we ought to encourage the developers that if they want to build property, that they ought to be doing that in the city of Chula Vista. It shouldn't be if they come up with the idea, we'll go along with it. That doesn't sound like a plan.
And apologize. What I meant to say is if a developer, I think what's important there is that the city, if there's a verifiable approach that we can track those types of activities, I definitely think it's something that we're open to. To date, and I think where we've seen some challenges is when a lot of other jurisdictions have looked at creating carbon offsets that would kind of be of that nature. There's been a lot of, or there hasn't been the structures around kind of tracking and monitoring how those systems are being installed. Are they installing systems, and how do you, and kind of the details of how do you make sure that that there is kind of established protocols that allow for those types of activities. I haven't seen those to date. I don't know if the city would be really the best opportunity or the best candidate to create those. But if there's opportunities, I definitely could see that playing a role.
Well, the city issues the permits for the solar panels. The cities the construction permits for the new developments. The city is issuing all the permits. Where's the problem of being able to link things together? One permit for one thing results in another permit for another, and you say both permits were issued, they were carried out. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Where's the data missing out of the equation?
When the organizations that create carbon offsets are required to meet pretty rigorous standards, and I think one that would be a challenge for them to meet in that situation is additionality. And it's not how does the city know that they are not charging the resident for that solar system that they are installed from the low-income home? How do we know it's going to, we don't know if we don't know where it's going. If they just said that it's being installed somewhere in the western Chula Vista, there's not a lot of established protocols that we can ask them to comply with to ensure that the development is meeting the standard for carbon offsets.
You put a plan together and make it happen.
Sure. So I think if we wanted to add a implementation action that would evaluate the opportunity for local carbon reduction projects, I think that's definitely something that we could add to this recommendation if we wanted to, or if others supported that.
Corey, this is Commissioner Ball. I'd like to suggest that a model you might look at would be what they do in the water resources, because, and I speak specifically to the city of San Diego, but I think the same approach is done with the other water agencies. When a developer comes in and wants to use, in this case, needs to use more water than initially was planned for that area in the build out, they're doing offsets. But they're not doing offsets to other single family houses. They're usually doing it in a public facility, such as, well, in this case, water might be upgrades at a school, irrigation or something like that, or a park. So instead of trying to control the results and the final output or final savings, shall we say, that might happen by having the offset be at many small houses, and how do they treat those customers, et cetera. If you were looking to have offsets where they were putting in solar panels or whatever it takes, more efficient fixtures at schools, parks, public buildings. I don't know what else I'm missing, but you know, some large known entity. I think that would work. I think it would be great.
I definitely think I think we can definitely add a action to this, but I also don't think that, you know, I think carbon offsets of that nature, we should be focusing on the emissions first. And so, you know, before we're thinking about carbon offset or, you know, those types of trades, we should really be thinking, how can we, you know, produce zero emission homes so that there's less desire or less need to do some of those types of activities. But, you know, like I said, I definitely think that we can evaluate the opportunity for creating a market of local carbon offsets. I know that's something that other jurisdictions have been evaluating. It has been, I know they've had challenges in that process. And it's not always necessarily as easy as just you know, installing a solar system somewhere. But like I said, I definitely think we can add a recommend or an action to support or to evaluate potential for local carbon reduction projects to offset emissions from new developments.
I'd like to add just a reminder here for the commissioners that with Action C to adopt a goal for carbon neutrality, maybe that's the opportunity you could find there for those more active or more direct type of actions that are being suggested at this point. So that could be an opportunity there, as well as well with the carbon neutrality goal as well. And even the climate emergency declaration, that could be something, but perhaps more closely related will be adopting the neutrality goal.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Manuel. Thanks. You know, as we roll this out, we can and work to expand it, we can definitely include, you know, different priorities as we, or different ideas or new programs as we learn more about their potential, and include that in, you know, resolutions that are adopted or other kind of messaging.
This is Commissioner Boggan, and is it possible right now to have carbon neutrality in something that, in a new facility that you build? Do we know how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm a big supporter of the American entrepreneurial spirit. And, you know, we can build from a direct emission standpoint. I mean, there's definitely all electric homes in Chula Vista that probably are using, all electric transportation right now. And so that's something that, in a lot of ways, like for some cases, we're already seeing. It really is about just, you know, we've done a tremendous job of cleaning the electrical grid. And it really is now about kind of finalizing our transition towards clean transportation, and removing some of the older fossil fuel legacy fossil fuel technologies from our homes. But that is something that, you know, we have all electric developments that are rebuilt in our community. To go a step further, I can say, you know, some of the future building codes are looking at really tackling some of the embedded carbon that goes into construction, with the potential for net negative carbon buildings. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunities out there.
There is something called carbon sequestration in concrete, which probably the city ought to be looking at.
Cool.
Hey, this is Commissioner Mathias. I'm back. I apologize for leaving for a few minutes, but I have a question. There's something that we can, as a commission, I would think, be able to kind of suggest or regulate, not regulate, I don't know the correct word, but I know that with the new machinery and the new equipment that's coming into Republic Services right now for the food waste program and the food waste, working on the food waste, how is that carbon neutral? Is that whole program carbon neutral? And that's something we should really think about, because if we're saying we're collecting all these food scraps, and yet look at all the machinery that's picking it up, look at all the new equipment that's being developed for it. I mean, we need to think all the way around when we're creating this infrastructure.
The only information I have at this point is that the composting facility will be on will have solar panels to power it. Beyond that, as far as like electric trash truck or trash vehicles or collection vehicles, at this point they're just rolling out as we speak. But I don't have information on that particular part.
Is that something that we could add to this? That I know it's with the new industry for the infrastructure, preventing fossil fuels. Is that something we could add to number 7? Maybe all, especially that's the city, since we have the contract with them, where they have the contract with the city. Something that you could oversee?
I would kind of, in some ways, I think that could be a part of the carbon municipal, adopt municipal goal for carbon neutrality, since that is a contracted service that we do with Republic. And so I think there could be, it could already be included in that. I don't know if we'd specifically want to point out any projects like that at this early stage. I don't know. I could go both ways. But I don't know. My only concern there would be if we mention like one project, we should probably mention more. And I don't know if we're necessarily at that stage to kind of think about what's the full range of carbon neutrality projects that the city could enact with our municipal operation and like services.
I agree.
Something that we seriously need to consider. I mean, if you're asking the community to get involved and start this, the city has to do it too, and they're the people who they contract or the companies that they contract. I see. We need to start.
Yeah, and I give the city 5 less years than the community. So I did I tried to get across that we will get there and not only get there, but get there earlier.
Okay.
But so I guess one of the big feedback that we're interested in is is there more desire for the carbon neutrality or zero carbon? And like I said, from a staff perspective, I like the carbon neutrality goal. I think it gives us a little bit of a buffer when we're talking about when we're going to get to zero and other sources that we can include for sequestration. But that being said, we're happy to we think a carbon zero goal is also really good. It just is more ambitious, and so with looking at something already ambitious, do we want to get more ambitious? That's really some of the feedback that I'm looking to get today from you all.
Well, I do like the idea of carbon, zero, reaching zero, but reality is carbon neutrality seems to be not that it's easier to achieve and reach zero at a different, down the line, but I think it's easier for the community to understand. But with the backing that this is coming, I think that would be the way to go. And plus, the state of California is going to be passing a lot of this, and so it's already coming down. But if we just start off, I don't know, what's the commission's thoughts on this?
Well, I guess my only concern is zero carbon possible? Basically, the earlier question about whether or not it's possible to do this. How do you know when you've gotten to zero carbon if the city, and again, this goes to the city council's desires, wants to continue to build out the population and new houses and so forth within the city? How can you get to zero if you're going to build new construction? You got to cut it off. You got to say no new construction if you're going to get to zero.
Well, I don't think. I was gonna say I don't think that it needs to be quite that. With that we need to make that choice. If we're
that's what I'm saying. I think if you wanted to make the choice to go to zero, you're saying no new development. I think that has to be the case.
I don't think it would. If we're able to, if future building codes produce a zero emission home, then adding more doesn't necessarily increase or make it impossible to reach zero emissions. I think that especially in the short term, as we add more residents, getting to zero is more challenging. But I don't think it's necessarily you either have new residents or zero emissions. I think that a lot of cities across California are going to be struggling with how do we grow and how do we grow in a sustainable way. In some ways, I think there can be some benefits from growing. The newer homes are much more energy efficient than the older homes. And so, as you're leveraging that new process of home construction to improve building standards in the city, I think there's some opportunities that come from that. And I think that's also, I think that there's definitely lots of opportunities. Also, it's important to keep in mind 2045, while not forever away, it's still 20 years. To think back on, what we thought possible, and Y2K, it was very different than what's possible today. So I think that I think it's good to keep in mind that there's challenges, but not necessarily saying that we can't grow or something of that nature.
Well, I guess maybe I overstated my case. I'm supporting carbon neutrality because I think carbon zero is not possible. So I'm basically saying I think you've got the right answer here, because I think if you went carbon zero, you basically would open up the potential that you would actually have to take some actions the city council is going to veto. They're going to say we're not going to stop building houses.
Sure. Sorry for the confusion.
This is Commissioner Baugh, and I also support the carbon neutrality. I think it gives us a little more flexibility, but I also have a slightly different twist on this, and that is that one of the ways you can get your carbon sequestration is through excessive use, a lot of use or promotion of compost. And so with trying to reduce your waste stream, you're looking to take all your greens and generate compost, and then you're looking for an opportunity to use them. So if you tie the two together, that we want carbon neutrality, we can get some points by using all this compost or mulch or compost. They fit together, and so I just like that concept.
Yeah, and to piggyback on Commissioner Baugh's comment, if you look at Escondido or Encinitas, they just passed a plan to have a farming community with a farming urban community. And I could email that to you guys. It was pretty amazing. Actually, I'll email it to the article. And it has information in there of what they're doing, and they're creating a community of homes that are carbon neutral, but they also have areas for plots, for community gardens, for composting. around in the center of all this. So instead of having the regular parks, they do have some parks, but they have all this opportunity for people to be able to be sustainable within themselves on their own, and or with the help of the community. So it was pretty amazing to see this, and Encinitas, I got to hand it to them. They're doing a great job with their goals. So I'll forward that to that link to Yasmin, and she'll get it out to you guys.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think that would kind of support and dovetail nicely into the additional recommendation based on feedback of evaluating potential for Chula Vista carbon reduction projects to offset emissions from, I guess it's really just to offset emissions, not necessarily tied to only new developments, but to offset emissions. And I think, those composting or other types of projects could fit very nicely into that.
I agree. Chula Vista is kind of the epitome of urban sprawl. And whatever things we could do just to influence the culture, such as Noah mentioned, urban forests, more green space, community gardens, these sorts of things, I think should all be on the table.
Yes, definitely. And I will say, we definitely are a large community, and we have some very suburban neighborhoods, but there is, a lot of planning and some densities that do go into a lot of the newer communities in Chula Vista. So, I think it might always be as visible when we're comparing ourselves to like highly dense communities. But there's definitely some work there, and we can definitely improve on it as well. So, okay. So any other questions or suggested actions? If not, I'll read the new recommendation again, and then we can move on.
Last question.
Yeah. No, please. Thank you.
Are there any requirements in this about, we spoke a lot about residential housing and transportation requirements, but are there any like LEED building certification requirements or that sort of thing for commercial buildings?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, and it's a great plug that I can provide. I would say for that, where I think that the best opportunity is with our currently the benchmarking ordinance that is going to be presented to City Council. I believe it will be next week on the 16th. And so, I definitely encourage if you get a chance to voice some support for that action, because I think that's, it's the start of an ordinance that might get, that I think is what you're referencing. And that's not to say that we can't, kind of add some actions if we want to make it stronger down the road. But it's just we're under development and getting presented next week. And what it seeks to do is really leverage information to drive energy efficiency. And it aims to increase the visibility of building performance, and through that increased visibility, drive energy efficiency measures, because no one wants to kind of be shown as having the least efficient building, and that's not going to affect your not going to impact, or not going to be positive for rents or anything else like that. But also over a time, over I believe 5 years or even maybe 10 years, if their building is not increasing efficiency, it requires some efficiency. Not quite to the standard of LEED, but just more so showing some increased efficiency over time. And so I think that, as that the policy gets created and implemented, I think there's opportunities to strengthen it. But I think that right now would be the best venue that we see for kind of encouraging commercial efficiencies. And I'll also say 2030 is coming, when the state is going to require solar panels on commercial buildings. So, that will be something that comes down the road. But even before that, we're hoping that the benchmarking ordinance can provide some support for energy efficiency in commercial buildings as well.
Yes, I had forgotten about that. Thanks for the reminder. I'll try to tune in for that. Make a comment.
Perfect. Any other comments or questions or recommendations? Okay, hearing none. So with the addition, oh, sorry, was there?
No.
Okay. So then with the addition of the implementation action of evaluating potential for Chula Vista carbon reduction projects to offset emissions. I still, let me, yeah, I guess that just to offset emissions, but it's not something I would, yeah, I guess of new development is appropriate, because I don't want people to think that the city is going to use these offsets necessarily to reach like our goal. It's really more of developments.
So it's new developments and new infrastructure?
I just said of developments. That way, if it's like a rehab, they could also maybe participate.
Okay.
So it's now it reads evaluate potential for Chula Vista carbon reduction projects to offset emissions of developments. Yeah, and we can, if as we're thinking about it, we can kind of wordsmith that a little bit before we take it to City Council, and I'll get feedback from others at the city. But really, the goal there is to evaluate if we can support Chula Vista carbon reduction projects that individuals can use, or yeah, if there's lots of potential, I don't think there's yeah, we'll have to. I don't want to go too far into how we could use those, because it really depends on if there's a lot of potential, we could use it in a lot of ways. If there's less potential, we could use it in less ways. Okay.
Okay.
So perfect. Well, thank you all. Sorry for that. That was a really good conversation, really good feedback. I think we've made some really good edits to these, and
Corey, I think there's one additional public comment I'm seeing that came in.
Yes, that comment came in between the conversation here, but we still need to do the 2-minute.
2-minute. Okay.
yeah. So actually, I had one next slide.
Corey, before we get off the recommendations, Chair Mathias, I would like to respectfully request that we take a look at draft recommendation number 2, and request if we could also include the language evaluate, just like we've done for some of the other proposed recommendations, specifically around the incentives. Evaluate any possible incentives.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any possible? Corey, you have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you read what that language says now with Dennis's addition?
Yep. So we just have evaluate the potential to provide incentives for building decarbonization projects.
Okay.
I think that's a real good point, because there's a lot of state incentives and grants and all kinds of monies out there at the state level.
Right. Any other questions or comments on other recommendations? Okay. So with that change, just also kind of wanted to circle back and follow up with or finish with the next steps. So after this slide, we'll be doing the public voting, and we'll be voting on the recommendations, hopefully, with the kind of feedback and edits that we've made through the conversation tonight. You feel confident in supporting these recommendations to City Council. Then we will move and present them to City Council, follow up with Climate Change Working Group stakeholders, always keep them involved in this process, and then present the recommendations and actions to City Council in April. And then we will, at the end of, or towards the end of the year, we'll return with the kind of the CAP update, which is really based around these recommendations, as well as an updated, or the updated forecast from SANDAG that was provided in the 2018 greenhouse gas inventory when we presented that. So those two kind of elements, looking at our projected emissions going forward, as well as new actions that we want to take, are going to be the core of that update. And then as we implement the policies and the recommendations, we'll return as we do with our regular efforts. And so I think, yeah, and if there's any questions about next steps or anything of that nature, let me know. And if not, we can move on to the 2-minute public comment.
Okay, well, I now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final comments on the item. And please, we need to ensure that new comments appear. Okay, the commenting period for this item is now closed. Have the commissioners had time to read? I don't believe there were any. I didn't see any. Did you guys?
Yes, there's
I don't know why I'm
10
not seeing them.
comments.
Really?
One comment is
Oh, yes.
one comment is neutral, and there are 3 comments submitted by the same person. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3. You're muted, Chair.
Okay, I'm only seeing the 6 comments that I had earlier. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the rest. Okay, so can you repeat that again? What were there was 1 neutral?
There's 1 neutral comment,
Okay.
and then there are 3 comments made by the same person. There are part 1, part 2, and part 3 all in support, and the
Okay.
rest of them are all in support.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Do any commissioners have comments or questions? Nope. Okay. So, wasn't that an action item?
Yes, it's an action item, so we need a first and a second based on.
Okay, so, it's just the script stops there. Okay, so can I take a vote? Who would like to be voting for this for the first, to approve this action item?
I'll move adoption of the recommendations from the working group with the amendments that we just put in this evening.
Okay. And do I have a second?
I will second it, Commissioner Ball.
Okay. So then I have Commissioner Rod and Commissioner Baugh. Commissioner Richardson first and Commissioner Baugh second. The motion with the changes that were suggested, the changes into the I don't know. I'm screwing this. This late, guys. Sorry.
To the recommendations.
Into the recommendations. There we go. Thank you so much. So, and can Manuel, you go through and call?
Sure. Commissioner Ball,
Aye.
Commissioner Guevara-Gluyas is absent. Commissioner Corrigan is also absent. Co-Chair Legaspi, you're muted.
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson,
Aye.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Aye.
Chair Mathias,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you. So then, yes, motion passes for the climate change working group's recommendation and recommended city council approval. Thank you. Okay, so next we have staff comments.
Hi there, this is Colleen Wisniewski. I have two quick comments before I pass it over to Manuel. Just a reminder, as we discussed at last month's meeting, our annual Sustainability Champion Awards are now open for nominations, and that's through the end of March. So you've got plenty of time to think about who you might want to nominate. It would be great if we could maybe get a nomination from each person on the commission if possible. But even spread to your networks and neighbors and friends that these are open so that we can recognize those folks this year. And then also wanted to just update folks that we, I don't know if any of our other commissioners might want to update on this as well, but we kicked off our ad hoc subcommittee on the climate emergency declaration. We met, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago to kick it off with Commissioners Rodriguez and Baugh. Along with me and Corey. Had a great kickoff meeting. We had a little scheduling conflict last week, but we'll be back for another meeting coming up soon. Yeah, so anyway, that's my quick update. And again, maybe during commissioners' comments, if our other commissioners wanted to add anything, you guys can add it then. But I will pass it to Manuel for the next staff comments.
The only item I wanted to bring up is that some really interesting and encouraging legislation has been introduced at the California legislature to deal with battery recycling. Actually, it's a producer responsibility bill. Same with packaging, some market development for plastics and organics, and also other special wastes that are really costing a lot of us municipality to incur our costs. And because of the pandemic, folks are actually at home and getting rid of a lot of their household toxics, which is a great thing, but the increased volume and increased numbers of attendance at our hazardous waste facility is really impacting us in many ways. So hopefully one of these pieces of legislation could address those costs that we're incurring. And then just quickly, while we were having the discussion, I did a little bit of research, and in December of 2020, UC Merced announced that their buildings were actually carbon neutral. So there is an example in this state of buildings that are carbon neutral at this point. So that's all I have.
Okay.
And then Dennis wanted to bring something up.
I did have some staff comments. Chair Mathias, commissioners, and thank you so much for that insightful feedback on the last item. As I mentioned before, we're very excited and looking forward to just your continued feedback and input, because this will drive a lot of what we'll be working on, for the next, foreseeable future. So we just want to continue this dialogue and receive your input as we determine our priorities. The other thing I did want to mention is the letter for the San Diego Green New Deal that you took action on last month was submitted to the city council members. We made it a top priority, so each of the council members have received a copy of that letter. The other thing I did want to mention is on January 13th, we were very excited to have a meeting with the incoming climate leadership at the White House, the new Biden administration, about a team of about 25 chief sustainability officers and directors of sustainability had an opportunity to meet. This was organized by Climate Mayors. The meeting was opened by Julie Rodriguez, who's a new White House Director of Intergovernmental Affairs. There was a welcome from Marty Walsh, who's a former mayor of Boston, who's now the new Labor Secretary, and he's the last chair of Climate Mayors. And then we had Gina McCarthy, who's the National Climate Advisor, give some remarks, as well as Ali Zaidi, who's a Deputy National Climate Advisor. They both have got an opportunity to engage with us and share with us some of their upcoming priorities, as well as engage with the member cities, the steering committee member cities. As I had mentioned previously, the city of Chula Vista is part of the steering committee for Climate Mayors. Also, as part of that discussion, Mayor Gassetti, LA Mayor, Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner, who's also going to be in a leadership role with Climate Mayors, as well as Mayor Gallegos from Phoenix, talked about how Climate Mayors being newly formed in 2014 and some of the things that we've been working on and some of the things that we've been able to accomplish on some of those priorities. So we close the discussion by talking about how the new administration could work with Climate Mayors to advance their climate policy, as well as help promote the industry for clean technology going forward. So we'll keep you posted, but I just want to share that with you.
Thank you. Chair's comments, just to let everyone know that I have been reaching out to council members to schedule an update meeting with them, and just to let them know where things stand and what we have, what's going on and what plans that we have for our future for this year. So I'll be contacting you guys when I get some dates and some possible times that we can meet with them. So, and the last thing I have is that we will be having a cleanup this weekend. If anyone's interested, it will be out on the bay. And then if you're interested in doing your own neighborhoods, just let me know and get back with me. I can give you all the supplies necessary, and you could help me out by giving some weights that you guys have collected during your cleanups. And Commissioner Richardson has done a great job, and same thing with Auguste and getting out into the kayaks and cleaning up shore. So I want to thank you guys so much for all your help. There's a lot of stuff out there because of all the rains that we've had, and a lot of trash is washed up, and things that we do not have access to or not able to reach except for on kayak. So if anyone's interested, it's free kayaking. But anyhow, so and I think that's it. Commissioners, do you guys have any comments?
I have followed, on the 20th of January, the Wildlife Advisory Group met. We covered two items, basically landscaping around the RV park and along the bikeway. The bikeway is now open from the boat works up to the RV park, and it's a very nice walk, even if you don't want to bike on it. So I encourage you to do that. The second item we covered is that the Wildlife Advisory Group is the one that ensures environmental compliance for all the projects that are within the Sweetwater Park, Harbor Park, developments and so forth. So we now have an ad hoc committee that's working to make sure we have a proper monitoring data collection process. And I'm on that ad hoc committee to try to work with that group to make sure that the environmental, the commitments were made are being met as these projects are being built out. So that was our meeting on the 20th.
Any chance that they found anything out about why those palm trees that are non-native got there? Sore subject, I know.
Not yet.
Okay. Any other comments? Nope. Okay. It is 7:47, p.m. And I am adjourning this meeting to March 8th, 2021 for the next regular meeting of the Sustainability Commission in conference room C101 in Building A at the City Hall, Chula Vista, California. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next month.
Stay safe.
Thank you.